Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Beam, and I have the pleasure and honor to serve as the Secretary of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. And I merely want to welcome you all to this part of the 2020 Agricultural Growth Summit. Those of you that have participated in the past have done so in person. And it's always been a great opportunity to get folks together from all across the state and discuss what we can do collectively to grow all of our sectors of agriculture. But obviously for the fifth summit this year, we are doing it virtually. And so far, I think we're finding that we're maybe able to reach or include more people and we're looking forward to trying it this year. Today is the sector for soybeans and other oil seeds, and we are excited about the panelists, and we welcome your input during the session, but at any time afterwards, feel free to chime in. So that's, of course, part of the mission of statutory mission of the department is to promote and grow and do outreach for Kansas agriculture, but we are only a facilitator. For the most part, we want you to be included in that and participate as well. So I'm proud of the team that's put this together and shifting gears and doing it in a whole new fashion. So at this time, again, I'd just say thank you for being in the session. And I'm going to turn it over to Dana Ladner. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Beam. Hello, I'm Dana Ladner with the Kansas Department of Agriculture. Welcome to the oilseed sector session, which includes soybeans, canola, sunflowers, and industrial hemp. Did you know that Kansas ranks 8th in soybean production in the United States? Sunflowers are 5th, and canola is 6th. We have 2 soybean crush facilities in our state and 1 combined canola and sunflower facility. In 2019, the first year industrial hemp was legal in our state, our producers planted 2,400 acres and were able to harvest 1,800 acres. In 2020, we have 214 growers, 20 distributors, and 23 processors licensed in our state. Soybeans and other oil seeds in Kansas have a direct output of $1.8 billion with 1,800 jobs. If you add in the indirect and induced impacts, we have a total of 8,200 jobs for a total economic contribution of $2.7 billion. The KDA vision is to provide an ideal environment for long-term sustainable ag prosperity and statewide economic growth. As we start this session, participants, please know that your mics are muted, but you can interact with us with the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring those questions, and this webinar is going to be recorded. With that, I'd like to introduce to you my friend, host of the daily radio program Agriculture Today, as today's moderator is Eric Atkinson. Eric, over to you.
All right, Dana, thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to play a small part in this important dialogue over oilseed production and hemp production as well here in the state of Kansas. And we'll proceed this way. First of all, we'd like to introduce the panel in total, and they'll be making brief 3 to 4 minute presentations on their angles concerning our topics today. Then we will hear from them and open it up for questions following their individual presentations. So without any further ado, let me introduce the panel to you. From the Kansas Soybean Association, the Director of Field Services, Dennis Hoopy, is with us. Also on board is the canola agronomist with K-State Research and Extension, Mike Stamm, producer from Lindsborg, and the chairman of the National Sunflower Association, Carl Esping, joins us. Also, the director of K-State's John C. Pear Horticulture Center near Wichita, Jason Griffin, is on board. Jason is the lead on the Industrial Hemp Research Program for the K-State College of Agriculture. And lastly, we have a producer from Southwest Kansas, Sublette to be precise. He is an industrial hemp producer for both the 2019 and 20 growing seasons, Jay Garrettson. is aboard. Welcome to all of you, and we will get to each of you individually here. But first, let's start with Dennis Hoopy of the Kansas Soybean Association for comments. Dennis?
Sorry about that. That's why I have a millennial in here with me. Anyway, I want to thank you, Eric, for the introduction. And Dana, thank you for roping me into this. But as Dana said earlier, that Kansas did rank 8th last year in production. This is up 2 points from where we normally fall in the country, where we're normally number 10. But due to the prevented planting in the Dakotas, we were able to jump over them. And if you look over the history of soybeans in the state of Kansas, it's remarkable how we have grown. Because last year we produced on 4.5 million acres, we produced 186.3 million bushels for a 41.5 bushel average. But you drop back 19 years in 2001, and we on 2.9 million acres, we only averaged 20 bushel to the acre for a total of 50 million bushels. By 09, we jumped up to 3.3 million acres, 37 bushel average for a total production of 120.25 million bushels. And most of this is due to the varieties that have become available for the state of Kansas, where we're able to move into drier climates, warmer areas. In fact, north central Kansas is the fastest growing soybean production area in the state. And yet at the same time, in southwest Kansas, 2 years ago, we had a producer win the yield contest at about 105 bushel to the acre, clear out in southwest Kansas. For years, I can remember growing up, and Sumner County was always announced as the #1 wheat producing county in the state. And now it has become the #1 soybean production county for the state of Kansas. And all this is on acreage that only less than 10% is being irrigated. So it's truly a remarkable crop. The total value that last year's production brought to the state of Kansas and our soybean farmers was equal to $1.565 billion. And yet at the same time, with all this production, we have to realize that 6 out of 10 rows or 6 out of 10 bushels has to be exported for a value of roughly $533 million in export benefit. But yet, as you look at the soybean, you have to realize that that bean is roughly 80% meal and 20% oil. Well, the meal over the history of the soybean in this country has always been what it has been crushed for. Because 97% of all the beans that are crushed in the United States go into animal feed for protein in the diets. Poultry is the biggest consumption user of soybeans, along with swine and then dairy. Last year alone in the state of Kansas, swine bought over $64 million of soy protein for the diet. But yet we can't forget the oil that is included in that soybean, because with the advent of biodiesel and its development, and it's accepted around the world and around the country as part of diesel fuel, it is adding another $60 million in value to the Kansas soybean, or roughly 55 to 65 cents per bushel. So overall, the soybean has become very valuable, and I will defer to Eric for questions later.
He's muted.
Eric, you're muted.
I clicked the wrong thing. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Dennis. And once again, we will take questions for Dennis and the rest of our panelists following each of their presentations here. So if you have a question, then please, by all means, put it in the Q&A and we will get to those. Next up, we want to bring in canola agronomist from K-State's Department of Agronomy, Mike Stom, for comments on this oilseed crop. So Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and the invitation from the KDA to share some information about canola in Kansas. And most people may be aware that canola actually has been a viable rotation crop in our cropping systems in Kansas for over 20 years. It was first introduced in the state to help us clean up our winter wheat fields, and farmers quickly discovered that there are rotation benefits to growing winter canola in our cropping systems. This led to an increase in investment by public and private entities in the crop. And so we've seen technologies in terms of varieties where we're starting to see Roundup Ready winter canola grown in the state. And we're also seeing improvements in winter hardiness as well. Those are two main drivers for the increase in acres in our state, as well as the crush facility that was mentioned out in Goodland. At one point in time, we had two crush facilities in our region, one located in Oklahoma City and in Goodland, and the combined impact on our economy led to a rapid increase of acres in the state to where we were at one time pushing around 60,000 acres, and that was in the 2013-2014 growing season. And all of us that were involved with the canola industry at that point in time really thought that we would continue to see that rapid increase in acres. However, with the recent downturn in our commodity price, as well as some erratic Kansas weather like drought and currently overly saturated soils, we had a couple of tough years with the crop. Also, the crush facility in Oklahoma City has closed, and that has hurt our market for the crop as well. And so having fewer markets as well as a challenged commodity price, we've recently seen a decline in planted acres in the state. So we are fortunate, though, over these years that we have learned many valuable lessons that have helped canola producers along, and we hope that these lessons will continue to help us to grow in the future if we can right some of these lower commodity prices that we are experiencing, as well as now that we know how to grow the crop efficiently and effectively in the state. We hope that those lessons will help us grow more canola acres as our commodity prices rebound and some of this erratic weather that we've seen across the state will hopefully balance out. Some of the things that we look forward to in the future that will help us to continue to grow winter canola acres, particularly variety development is one area where we are seeing a lot of progress, and some of the traits that we are hoping to see introduced are more consistent hybrids for the region that are higher yielding and also higher oil producing. We're also looking at improved herbicide traits for the state as well. And so those things in combination with a better market, we fully hope to see winter canola acres grow once again in the state. With that, Eric, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, Mike, thanks once again. Appreciate your input here. And he will be available for questions about canola production in Kansas likewise. Next up, let's bring in Carl Esping. Carl is a producer once again from Lindsborg in central Kansas. Carl currently is serving as the chairman of the National Sunflower Association. So Carl, offer some thoughts for us if you would.
Carl, you're muted.
There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Sorry about that. Thanks again, Eric. And it's kind of exciting to be a part of this. I am also chairman of the Kansas Sunflower Commission, and luckily to be the first Kansas producer to ever chair the national group. And it's really been an exciting time this last 8 or 10 years, the opportunity to work with sunflowers and watch them grow. Sunflowers are a pretty valuable resource. The last couple of years when we've seen these depressed commodity prices, sunflowers have actually raised, held steady, and then been gradually raising. This last year, or the crop that's in the ground right now, was contracted around 20 cents a pound. That's up about 15–20% from the past. And with the short crop that was in the North and South Dakota areas this last year, old crop prices going into bird food plants right now are being brought out of the bin at 25 to 28 cents a pound. And I challenge any producer or agronomist to do the math. That makes it a very, very profitable crop. That's where I've done some rotational work and increased my sunflower acres for this year. We're anticipating somewhere in the neighborhood of a 75% increase in acres in Kansas this year, with demand and most of that being already contracted. So it's kind of an exciting time with bird feed and oil, like the other oil seeds that we have in our state. Cooking oil, snack food industry, a lot of things go into play. Restaurant use for cooking oil, how long it stays in the fryer, that kind of thing, smoke points. It's an exciting time. Exports are very important to us with the confection area that is grown in western third of Kansas. They like the drier air, lower humidity than what we do have here in central Kansas. But a lot of that goes to the snack food industry, and then a lot of also is exported Mexico, Canada, and to Spain. What I'd like to do, double cropping or rotational crop after wheat, is an exciting venture for me. I'd like to go in immediately after the harvest is over. Well, for a particular field, the boys cut the wheat and I'm the one on the planter double cropping. I always said that planting into wheat stubble is the best natural herbicide you can get. It works a lot better. It holds moisture, holds the heat down, and it just works very, very well. Very much of a limited water product, Southwest Kansas, Western Kansas, where you have a lot of limitations on your irrigation wells like we have here in McPherson County. You can still rotate out for a higher using crop on one half of the pivot and then sunflowers on the other, which will use greatly less amount of water. For some of the future use, we do have a very large variety trial going on down in the Hutchinson area, Hutchinson and Haven. And we might talk about that a little bit later. We'll see how time allows. But it's an exciting time for all of us in the sunflower industry. Profitability, limited water. You can plant sunflowers from middle of May to the end of July. So I think that's a good reason for us to take a good hard look at alternative. And very good. And I thank everyone for their time today. Thanks, Eric.
Well, thank you, Carl, for being part of this, and we will tap you for further thoughts on the future of sunflower production expansion in the state of Kansas as we go along here. Next up is again, the director of the John C. Pear Horticultural Center near Wichita, K-State's Jason Griffin. And Jason has once more been the lead on conducting industrial hemp research on the part of K-State's College of Agriculture. And Jason, bring us up to speed on that front, if you would.
I sure will. Thank you very much for the introduction, Eric. So we're down here at the John Pear Horticulture Center, a little south of Wichita, and we have a long history of research and extension activities in specialty crops, and industrial hemp is another specialty crop. So in 2019, we dove in head first. We're following up halfway through the season with our second crop here in 2020. We are part of a USDA multi-state collaborative. We also this year picked up several industry partners. Based on our success last year, we had several breeders and seed suppliers contact us and want to put their varieties in our trials. So we're up to 24 varieties of fiber and grain industrial hemp in our research class. We've got about 10 CBD varieties as well. We got our seed planted roughly 4 weeks earlier than last year, which was good. So the plants are considerably taller than they were at this point last year. We've got some great, vigorous, healthy plants. Mother Nature was kind to us this year. We're learning a lot. They're already providing some really good information. Similar to last year, one of the big things we've learned that not all varieties are created equal. So one of the things we're trying to really emphasize to farmers is don't simply buy seed because it's available. The variety makes a huge difference. We're looking at water use efficiency. Obviously, water is a big issue in the state. We're learning things like good germination and good seedling vigor is really, really important. The varieties that just have poor vigor and poor germination quickly get overrun with weeds. There's no labeled herbicides for use in industrial hemp, so the weeds are a huge issue. We're learning the varieties that did poorly last year are doing poorly again this year. The varieties that did well last year are doing well again this year. So it wasn't Mother Nature last year or our error. We're seeing some consistency from year to year. We're keeping our eyes on pests. That's obviously a big issue because there are no pests labeled either. So far, we haven't had many pest issues this year. The pests seem to come on a little bit later. The grain is starting to develop right now. So, for instance, yesterday I picked the first worm off that I saw. We have Eurasian hemp borer as an issue. I'm expecting to see aphids pretty soon. We have a new pest this year, which is fun. In my 18 years here, I have never seen a Japanese beetle on the facility. And this year I've seen roughly a dozen of them, every single one of them on industrial hemp. So that'll be a new pest we're going to have to deal with in the years coming. On the CBD side, we've got plants going in greenhouse. We've got plants going in the high tunnel. Last year, we saw a tremendous improvement in growth in the high tunnel versus outside plants. So we're repeating that again this year to see if that was just a fluke or if it's real. In the greenhouse, we saw some powdery mildew and some botrytis issues. So we're testing out a fogging system this year that basically fogs the greenhouse at night with some xylitol is the product, hydrogen peroxide basically. And so far that seems to be real promising as well. Let's finish up with, this is not a solo show. I think we're doing a great job down here, but it takes a team, and K-State has industrial hemp covered. My colleagues in horticulture, agronomy, the vet school, ag econ, bio and ag engineering, and human nutrition. So there's lots of us putting in effort to make this, to try and get this covered for producers in Kansas. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Eric. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Jason. And as folks can hear, a very robust research agenda on industrial hemp going on the part of K-State and partners in that research. So we'll talk more about that as well further ahead. But let's look at industrial hemp from the producer vantage point now. Once again, Jay Garrettson is with us. He farms near Sublette in southwest Kansas, and he has a year and a half of industrial hemp production under his belt now, if these numbers are correct. Jay, go ahead if you would, please.
Hello, Eric. Thank you for that introduction. And first off, let me just say that K-State and KDA, starting with Secretary Beam, have been really instrumental in helping us get this new crop, this new opportunity up and going here in the state. So I appreciate all of that. Dana came clear out to Haskell County last year, walked us through some of those early guidelines, which always seem to be changing. And so we've had a lot of great support in getting this off the ground. And I really want to recognize everybody at KDA, Braden Hoke and his whole crew. If you've ever wanted to know what it's like to learn to drink from a fire hose, just start growing industrial hemp for CBD production. And, a lot of what Jason brought up there from the experiment station really rings true. And last year we grew 300 acres of industrial hemp for CBD production. And that will remind you in a hurry a lot of the things that we're talked about with soybeans and some of the other traditional commodities, and the advancements over the last 50 years in all kinds of herbicides and other production methods and help we get from technology. With industrial hemp, none of that is available yet. So if you want to develop a new appreciation for a time-honored implement, otherwise known as the hoe, just jump right in with industrial hemp. So anyway, with all that being said, on a serious note, we're really in a state of flux right now with the markets for industrial hemp. Agronomically, we're learning to grow this crop successfully, just like Kansans have learned to grow virtually every other crop throughout our history. So agronomically and growing the crop, I think we're really doing well overall. Again, if you're thinking about industrial hemp, I would really encourage you to start with 1 acre. And when I say 1 acre, I mean 1 acre. So when you grow up running a 45-foot sweep plow in a wheat fallow rotation, you tend to overestimate what a 6-inch wide hoe bit can handle. And with no herbicides, you're talking about tillage. So anyway, last year we had a lot of success with our harvest, and we also are processors. That went well. And really, the only thing holding us back right now as individual producers and as the opportunity for the state is the markets. And that's primarily a function of FDA not having approvals finished up for the cannabinoid products at retail. There's literally hundreds of products that are ready to go to mass market. And a lot of the large distribution companies and food companies are simply on hold, waiting on FDA to issue further guidance, if you will. So we're actually launching a retail line as we learn to vertically integrate out of necessity. But we couldn't be more excited for the opportunity. It really is the highest value opportunity per acre, and for us in Southwest Kansas, per acre inch of water just over the horizon once these products start getting into the mainstream marketplace. So another caution is cannabinoid production, fiber production, and seed production. There are cross-pollination issues. So be sure and check with your neighbors and try to figure out who wants to grow what where. It's really important to keep those separate. But overall, our second year, the plants look better than ever. We've caught some wonderful rains, and so we're really looking forward to harvest here in a couple months. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Eric.
All right, Jay, many thanks. Looking forward to talking more about your experiences as we go along here in the program. Before we get into the Q&A, I would turn it back over to Dana to talk polling with us. Dana?
Hi, thanks, Eric. A poll is going to appear on your screen, and after listening to the panelists and a review of the current ag growth priorities, we would like those that are participating to pick your top 2 priorities from the list that's on your screen. Again, from what we come up with from great comments from our panelists and from the current ag growth document, what are your top 2 priorities? So if you want to select those and hit submit, that would be great. They include education and outreach to consumers, faster regulatory changes and approvals at the state and federal level, increased processing opportunities for the initial product, increased utilization in state via the end users, the livestock industry, industrial users, food industry, and international market development and research needs and funding. So with that, if you guys want to make sure that you have some priorities listed and what we'll do is we'll look at these and find out what those top priorities are, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on it. And then once we hear from our panelists in the Q&A, we may tweak this priority list, or we may keep it the same and see if anything has changed at that time. So again, for those listening in, if you would please select your top 2 priorities, that would be great. Look forward to that. And we're getting some votes in. I'm getting some information from our IT team that folks are polling and submitting their information, so that's great. All right, the poll is now closed. Sean, do you have those results? All right, it looks like education and outreach is first there with those that polled, and then faster regulatory changes for approvals at the state and federal level. So that's what we have to look at from this initial group of information. And so with that, Eric, let's turn it back to you to continue this and listen to our panelists.
All right, Dana, very good. Thank you very much. And we'll just go rapid fire here and tick through a few things that are drawn from what our panelists said in their opening comments here. Once more, if you have questions that pop to your mind as we go along, use the Q&A function and submit those questions, and we will pass them along to whatever panel member you identified to address that question. Let's go back to Dennis Hoopy of the Kansas Soybean Association. And Dennis, just a quick update, if you would, on the current state of soybean processing capacity here in the state of Kansas. And with that, how many additional acres will it take to encourage expansion of that capacity?
Well, Eric, roughly right now we're using up around 130 million bushels of Kansas soybeans that are being crushed in the state, not only in Emporia, Wichita, but also across from Fort Scott on the Missouri side and up at St. Joe, and of course some go into Cargill and Kansas City. So that leaves us roughly 50 million, 60 million bushels that are going out of state either through exports or other ways. But for us to increase the crush capacity here in the state, I don't know that I specifically have an answer for that because the variability of our production. One of the other panelists mentioned how with drought and too much water and things like that, it very much ranks the amount of beans we produce every year up and down. It just ricochets one way or the other. I think we're going to have a great crop this year. But one of the things that I think would be first off is location, location, location. It would take, in talking to our crush industry, some of the things they pointed out is infrastructure is the most critical thing for a bean crushing plant to even be considered. And by infrastructure, that means having enough water there, having enough power in that location, plus the fact of having not only one, but 2 Class 1 railroads. Because you can't limit yourself to 1 Class 1 railroad and be expected to have a good market, because then they kind of control what you do. So I think those are the more critical things versus just additional acreage. It's kind of the fact that, okay, if we have the crush plant, will the acres grow, or do the acres have to grow for the crush plant? Well, I think in the first place, we have to have this infrastructure in place for it even to be considered.
Very good. Thanks, Dennis. Carl Esping, a question for you. You're obviously highly enthused about the potential for further sunflower production here in the state of Kansas. As a producer, looking at it from that standpoint, what do you think the main challenges are to growing sunflowers in Kansas? They obviously have a capacity to operate under limited water situations and so forth, very thrifty in that respect. But what are the agronomic hurdles to clear, do you think?
Well, that's almost a loaded question, Eric. You know, well, there's one thing is when I go to a farm show or to a group and speak, the question always comes up: why should I grow a weed? You know, that's a big problem. But things have changed, and yields have, the new varieties, yields have risen. Sometimes you talk about a little difficulties receiving points. The local elevators, when we've had increased corn, increased soybeans, there's only so much elevator space. And what we have found has helped the most is storing, if you can, sunflowers on the farm. And then there's all kinds of opportunities. The bird food market is greatly underestimated here in Kansas. We have numerous bird feed packaging around the state. And right now they're paying equal to or more than the oilseed price. So it's something to do. And herbicides coming along great. So I'm very, very positive, no question.
Since you brought it up, Carl, briefly here on storing sunflowers vis-a-vis other standard crops, if you will, other standard grains we produce in Kansas, are there specific challenges there that a grower would need to be aware of?
Not really. You just got to be careful like any other crop. You don't put it in the bin too wet. You need to have good air. If you cut that those sunflower heads in and bring them in at 10% or under moisture and have just regular air, you're going to be getting along fine. There's no particular problems there at all, but don't bring them in weedy and 12 or 15%, then you're asking for trouble.
All right. Question here for Jay. Just very generally, Jay, what initially interested you in producing hemp? What was the inspiration to take something of a leap of faith here?
Thank you, Eric. What's the old saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. Well, when you're running out of water in western Kansas and corn is your favorite crop, you're motivated to find something new. And so that's initially what drove our interest. Western Kansas has got to find a higher value crop per acre inch of water in order to be able to reduce our reliance on the Ogallala aquifer and not crush the economy at the same time. So that's initially what drove our interest.
And the rotation, to be specific, just so folks are clear for our farmer folk out there, the rotation you're utilizing is wheat, sunflowers, fallow. What is it?
So all of our production is for CBD production. And so it's under irrigation. And we're actually using a hemp corn rotation. And what we do is typically fallow half the pivot of corn. And then that way we can focus any needed water on, usually it's the inside 10 acres of a 120 acre pivot of corn. And so you're looking at being able to gross 10 times the revenue, if you will, per acre of corn. And so that translates to a 10x increase in the value of water versus using that for corn production. And don't get me wrong, corn is probably always going to be my favorite crop. We just have a water limitation that we're having to learn to live within.
Very good. I might follow up in talking with Jason Griffin, who's looked at this from so many research angles here. But Jason, from the productivity standpoint, what would you view as the greater end use opportunity for hemp growers for the non-CBD market now? As a food, or rather as grain, as fiber, what?
That's a great question. So for non-CBD, you're looking at grain or fiber. And right now, for these first couple of years, grain is more, I think, more familiar, probably had more end uses for Kansas farmers. It would be used a lot like soybeans. It could be used, you press it for the oil. It has a relatively low smoke point, so probably not for cooking, but more for flavoring. It's used in it could be used in animal feed. It could be used for cattle and horses. So it has lots of uses. I think long-term though, I think fiber has more uses. But the processing isn't quite there yet. I think once we get there, once the processing gets there and we're able to process all the fiber and there's somebody willing to purchase that fiber and use it in their products, the fiber has a lot more uses. So I think we're going to see a change from one to the other as we go down this path a little bit further. You're muted, Eric.
Sorry, I did it again. I've got to click that harder, I guess. So Jason, following up quickly here on the research front, as has been expressed here, one of the main challenges in controlling weeds in hemp. That's been difficult, of course, because herbicide use is prohibited. So can one attain sufficient weed control culturally by planting populations and so forth?
It is proving very difficult. So basically what we're looking at is organic production. So organic weed control in an agronomic system is more of an art form than anything else. If you do one thing wrong, or Mother Nature throws one curveball at you, the weeds could get ahead of you. So obviously planting early to get ahead of the weeds is important. Sort of one cultivation, hopefully when the seedlings are in that 10 to 12 foot range, and then hopefully you get your crop off to a start. You're able to keep the weeds down so the crop can outcompete the weeds, but there's always going to be a certain amount of weeds. I think eventually we will get some chemistry labeled. Canada is able to use trifluralin, pre-emergent, in their crops. So I think eventually we'll get there, but we just got to get the approval for it. But right now, if you're interested in growing weed-free industrial hemp in an agronomic system, I would spend most of my time, most of my homework effort looking at organic corn production, using cultivation, using flame maybe if that's possible, but it's going to be tricky.
And for follow-up to your grower, Jay, you mentioned learning to be more familiar with the hoe. So have you adapted back to cultivation successfully?
Yes. And then, so this year's been much more enjoyable. We were able to get the cultivation. Well, let me back up and say I agree with Jason. Getting planted earlier helps. And hemp actually germinates at cooler temperatures than pigweed and kochia, which are our two primary issues. So that's probably the biggest tip I could give people. Don't be afraid to plant early. And like I said, another reason I recommend 1 acre. Plant 1 acre the 1st of April, and if you have problems, plant 1 acre the 10th of April. Jumping in at 300 acres, fortunately, my wife's not in earshot here because she could tell you some stories about some of the planting this spring relative to last year. But yeah, cultivation has come online this year quicker. Last year, we were creating, designing, and modifying equipment for every step in the process. So this year feels a lot more relaxed than last year.
What is old was old is new again. In that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. Go to your local museum and see what your grandpa and your great-grandpa started with, and go pull that out of the barn and start there, and hope you're back in the tractor by the end of that session.
Very well. We would remind those who are taking part in this webinar, viewing what we have today, to submit any questions you have for any of our panelists through the Q&A function, and we'll get to those questions as they come along, so take full advantage of that. Let's turn back to Mike Stamm from K-State's Department of Agronomy, once again the canola breeder for K-State. Mike, just generally speaking, the market outlets for canola, there may be perceived as a shortage of those. Are those the main detriment, or is that the main detriment to expanding canola acreage in Kansas, do you think?
That's a good question, Eric. As I mentioned in my remarks, we did lose the regional crush facility in Oklahoma City, and that certainly has hurt, but we are still very fortunate to have the facility out at Goodland that does accept the crop. I would say, yeah, more delivery points, more places to take it locally would certainly help with expanding acres. But right now, I think it's probably the commodity price that's probably hurting it the most. It's hard to make it competitive with some of the other crops, especially when producers were first getting into canola. Commodity prices for all of our crops were at extreme highs we haven't seen in lots of years. And so that helped to get producers on board. And now that the commodity price has dropped back down, that has certainly hurt the acres. But anytime you can add crush capacity, certainly I think you would gain acres.
And somewhat aligned with that, Mike, how can canola gain more favor with potential consumers? What would be the selling point that perhaps could bolster that side, and one would hope at some point bolster the price for the raw product, canola?
Just maintain the education piece on the benefits of canola oil as an oil that we routinely use now in our kitchens. It's a very healthy oil. It does have a qualified health claim and very low in saturated fat, with many other benefits, including a high smoke point. So it can be used in a lot of frying operations. So I think those are the things that we need to maintain and keep in front of consumers, that it is such a valuable oil for our diets that it makes a lot of sense to grow more of this crop.
All right, thanks, Mike. Dennis Hoopy, would you join us for a moment here and comment on this? And this is a rather hot topic out there right now, and that is the biodiesel industry and government support of that industry. It seemingly is always subject to the political winds. How can the industry find stability in that sector beyond the politics?
Well, beyond the politics is a good question, because I'm not sure we'll ever get out of the politics of the industry. We were lucky this last year, December, to get an extended biodiesel tax credit. In other words, through 2022, we have 5 years. We retroactively went back and then forward. So we have roughly 3 years of the tax credit being in place. In fact, they're even working now to extend that out and phase it out, just as what happened to ethanol after several years of their credit. So that is providing a lot of stability to the industry, because they now know that it's there. It's always been retroactive, and which means you're selling thinking you may get it, and then sometimes you don't get it. But so we feel very blessed with that. I think getting us beyond the issues with the EPA on the small refinery exemptions, because that takes a lot of demand out of the market. If we can follow the intent of the law when the Congress passed that, to provide for the development of alternative fuels in this country, so we weren't so dependent on the imports of petroleum, I think that would help. So I just think those are probably the two most critical things, Eric, in moving forward.
But the headwinds are always difficult, it seems. And Dennis, those will not go away. That's your indication.
That is true, because just about the time we do have some great supporters in Congress that are working very hard to make sure that we're there for forever, because we do blend into the system very well and we provide a better fuel. But yet there's always the politics when you're relying on legislation to help stabilize the industry in its infancy until it can reach a mature product. I mean, the product is well developed. It's been passing all the tests, et cetera. It's a great fuel, but yet the industry itself needs to be allowed to reach maturity, just as we, for the last 100 years, have subsidized the petroleum side of things. So it's not unusual that we're in this, because petroleum fought it for years and years. And of course, they're still fighting for their subsidies.
All right, Dennis, thank you. And again, viewers, get your questions in. We'll get those on the broadcast here as soon as possible, but you have to submit them first. So use the Q&A function if you have any questions for any of our panelists. Carl Esping, as a sunflower producer, what would you like to see as the next initiatives in sunflower production research for Kansas production? Where would you like that emphasis to be?
What we've been working very hard within the state and the Kansas Commission, and in cooperation with the National Sunflower Group, North Dakota State University, K-State, also very active. Research work on herbicides going on out at Fort Hays at the ARS. We visited out there a couple times. The herbicide trials that go on, we've made great strides. You know, for years and years, we couldn't control a broadleaf weed in the sunflower field. It just didn't happen. And now we've got many opportunities to use different products that work well. And I'm a no-tiller, 100% no-till. And again, where I stress the double crop in wheat, we've learned to use new herbicides in wheat stubble and almost be weed free. But I did mention also we have a large research for variety plot down at Haven or Hutchison. And we've got 90 varieties with 360 plots out there. And this is the third year of a study with cooperation between K-State and North Dakota State. So we're coming up with flowers that will bloom in 42 to 44 days, Eric. Where you can plant those 1st of August and they'll still make. And the yield is still, they're the oil type, of course. But it's great strides. We're real excited.
Carl, you mentioned the oil type, and you are, again, the president of the National Sunflower Association. What is being done to more aggressively promote sun oil as a cooking oil alternative?
That's a controversial question for me, Eric. It's kind of fun because I believe, and the other gentlemen involved here, we're talking about the consumer. And I believe that we don't do enough to promote our product to the consumer. The national group and Kansas also, we do put a fair amount of money into restaurant education, cooks, chefs, restaurateurs, because most of our oils in our industry here are zero trans and low sats with a high smoke point. It goes along pretty good, but we need to educate the consumer more than what we do, because we spend quite a bit of money educating, like I said, the restaurant people, the chefs, and we do that in national magazines and webinars such as this. So we're making strides. We'll get there.
Very good. Jay Garrettson, as a producer of industrial hemp now, how would you see the infrastructure and how must it evolve further to make industrial hemp a more viable alternative crop, to put it that way, for Kansas growers?
Sure, Eric. Really, there's no problem with infrastructure. And when I say that, there's not a lot out there, but there are tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of investment capital sitting in the wings, literally waiting for consumers to demand the FDA make things more accessible. We're seeing all kinds of consumer benefits, all the way through pharmaceuticals to lotions. It's just an amazing crop to see, particularly on the cannabinoid end. And I'm not even touching on the hundreds of products for grain and fiber hemp. But just on the pharmaceutical side, you're talking about a natural product with virtually no known side effects, massive opportunities for improvement, and the investment capital is literally waiting in the wings. But if you remember last summer and fall, there was a vape pen issue that came up, and it was like a multi-car train wreck, if cars can have train wrecks. But what happened there was you had the national sales age of tobacco increased from 18 to 21 over that vape pen uproar, and that just froze all the investment capital of all the larger sized food and beverage and pharmaceutical manufacturers right in its tracks, and they all jumped from leaning forward into the FDA approvals to jumping back for fear of consumer product liability issues based on not on danger of the product, but on lack of rules and regulations on the part of FDA. So I would really encourage consumers that are becoming more and more aware, particularly with rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, the list is long and varied of all the health benefits, but until we get clear regulatory guidelines, the large companies that control the mass amount of food and beverage ingredients are simply being told by their in-house counsel they have to stay on the sidelines. So once we get FDA approval, which is coming just at a glacial pace, and now COVID has slowed that down again, but that's really the only thing left standing in the way. The investment capital is sitting on go.
Okay, Jay, thank you. And we will finish with one quick thing we'll squeeze in here with Jason Griffin. Jason, you mentioned the multifaceted research you've conducted with industrial hemp to date. What will be the focus of your future hemp research then? What will you be prioritizing?
You know, we're going to keep going forward with variety trials, but we're not going to beat that up too much. But as new varieties into the market, we want to see which ones do well here, because a slick color photograph in a sales catalog doesn't do this thing justice. But we need to move past this production. We need to get into the utilization and start looking at fiber, you know, start looking at how fiber is processed, start looking at how grain is processed and the storage, and get past just the production. And we can grow this crop. We can grow it very well. So it's time to, in the next couple of years, move on to what happens next once you've harvested.
All right. Thanks, Jason. And I would like to thank the panel in total for imparting these thoughts today in this various areas. Dennis Hoopy, Kansas Soybean Association, Mike Stamm from K-State, also Jason Griffin from K-State, Carl Esping from Lindsborg and the National Sunflower Association, and again, Southwest Kansas farmer Jay Garretts. And we appreciate the time and the input from each and every one of you. And I'll turn it on back over now to Dana.
Great. Thank you, Eric, and all of our panelists. What great information, and I appreciate you taking your time today to be with us on these great opportunities in the oilseed industry in Kansas. I'd like to go back to the poll that we have initially started with, and we're going to put the same questions up to find out if your perception as participants have changed on the priorities that you voted on earlier. So while you're doing that, again, pick your top two and then hit submit. And I'd like to remind you of the crossover sessions that will be coming up for the Ag Summit. On August 17th, there'll be a session on statewide initiatives. On August 18th, we'll be talking about protecting the food chain, the supply chain during the COVID-19 crisis. And on August 19th, we'll be talking about trade. Something new that I'd like to let you in on, if you haven't heard about it before, is the Kansas Ag Heroes program. Farmers, ranchers, and agribusinesses have performed essential functions during this pandemic and have kept food on the tables worldwide. We would like to recognize those that have gone above and beyond during these unprecedented times. Nomination for this program will close on August 10th. Information about the program can be found on our website, which is listed on the screen in front of you. And we're really, really excited about that program because Kansans have gone above and beyond during this pandemic. One thing I'd like to bring to your attention is that commission elections for districts 1, 2, and 3, which is the western third of the state, are coming up. So look for a media release on that. Candidate petitions and applications will be in by November 30th and voting to begin on January 15th. Sean, do we have results from the poll? You'd go ahead and post those up. And looking at the poll results from earlier, it looks like the education and outreach is still at #1, but that's gone from 55% up to 67% with that. And we've got a tie for second on faster regulatory approvals and changes at the state and federal level, and research funding. So research funding was close earlier with that at a #3 for a tie. So we have changed, but after listening in, folks have really decided that the outreach and education are super important for those in the state. With that, I would like to thank you for spending time with us this afternoon. Panelists, Eric, thank you for all that you do on behalf of Kansas. We appreciate your time again today. Participants, thanks for hanging with us for this hour. Our next Ag Summit session will be on Monday at 2 p.m. with the poultry industry. With that, again, thank you to everyone and have a great weekend.